Welcome to this week's BTS Gems. We are extracting this bit from my conversation with Dr. Robin Scupper about suicide prevention awareness, and we're looking at signs that someone is at risk of suicide. What are some of the signs that family and friends, that loved ones can use to identify someone who is at risk of attempting suicide?
Well, it's really interesting. One thing that a lot of people will say is that they felt that the person was drifting away from them to some degree. They may be present physically, but they feel like, that they're not as accessible. They don't really think they know what's going on with them emotionally. They get the sense that even though the person is telling them that they're fine, it's just that sense that they're not really, being genuine. So what I would suggest, with people is that we tend to just take people at face value, and it may be a good idea, but because you don't want to be suspicious of everybody. But when you see someone's behavior is kind of changing, or when you sense something, like you get the sense that something's just not right, in our gut, we may be wrong, but the reality is that we tend to know those pretty close to us fairly well. And even if we're not really identifying what it is that's different, we know there's something different. And we also have to be aware that people tend to push us away a lot. And sometimes we may allow that to happen just because, we're giving them their space. But when we find that somebody seems kind of troubled, seems like there's something going on, and then they keep putting us off, they don't want to get together, or they, don't really want to talk very long, they keep cutting us off the phone, or they won't contact us, I think that's a sign that we really need to reach out. We may just step back, but that's the last thing we should probably do. We really need to kind of push ourselves forward towards them, because it's so easy when you're depressed to step back from people and not want contact, and to try and just push people away. So I think that that's a big thing. I also think when people start talking about feeling overwhelmed and feeling stressed, and when we respond to them, they just don't see that there's any options or any way out, and any suggestions we make, they kind of like push aside and find reasons why they won't work. I think that should be a concern. I think if you notice that someone has a serious physical illness, they've lost a job, something is wrong in a relationship, or they've lost somebody, these are all things that can spur us to consider suicide if it seems like things are just not going to get better. And one of the major things is we're afraid to ask the question. And we're just afraid that if we bring up the word suicide, it's going to suggest it to somebody. And the reality is we have to have that discussion. We have to know if somebody is thinking of harming themselves or ending their life, and when things are overwhelming.
True. So we all need to be more comfortable, willing, and ready to actually offer support if we see that our loved ones or friends seem to be having a hard time dealing with a challenging situation or circumstance. And sometimes we may not be aware of a problem that is happening or a situation, but just as you identified, a significant change in behavior, and those red flags start going off, and we should really check in and to offer support, because that can really offer real help in that moment.
Absolutely. And there are a couple of specific things that we should look for in terms of change of behavior. If they suddenly just all of a sudden become calm and they've been stressed, that's unusual. We need to look into that. If they're abusing alcohol or substances of other kinds, and more so, or they just started, that's a concern. And also the number one risk factor, which I think you mentioned before, is that if they have a prior suicide attempt, it's interesting. One of the studies I looked at, only 10% of them said that after the suicide attempt, they felt badly about it and relieved that they hadn't succeeded. The others still really had the sense that they'd be better off dead. And so I think we need to look at the fact that if someone has made a prior suicide attempt, even if they seem like they're doing better, it's still something that really needs to be watched closely, because they can suddenly slip back into that And, it seems to be a viable thought then in their mind.
And I will, this is an important gem that I'm going to pull out. This is something that we discussed when I was in your class as well. One of the most important factors that highlight a possible suicide attempt is a previous attempt. Did I say that right?
Yes.
And that's something that we must all pay very close attention to. Once we know somebody who has attempted suicide, we need to give them keen attention as we help them to work through, or offer support as we get them to work through whatever situation has them feeling overwhelmed and hopeless.
And it's really ironic that sometimes when they seem like they're doing so well afterwards, they've been in therapy, people report that they're doing better, they report they're doing better. That may actually be the time when they make their next attempt. Robin Williams, actually, people around him said that he seemed much better, his mood was good, everybody was surprised at the time that he chose to do it. But that's not unusual. So it might be when someone's in an upward kind of trajectory, that they might actually make their attempt. They have the energy to do it, and they may feel clear-headed even if they're not, and they may actually try to kill themselves even though it seems like they're doing so much better.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of BTS Gems. See you next week.